The light on the bridge of the Drethan flagship was the color of old copper, dim, warm in a way that contradicted everything happening inside the room. 312 human warships held position in a sphere around the Drethan homeworld, their hulls still streaked with carbon scoring from the Korath belt. Not one of them had fired. Not one of them needed to. On every screen, every datapad, every personal communicator on the planet below, a dead man was speaking. Pediatrician. His coat stained. His voice breaking but not broken. 9 hours of footage, looping now for the 4th consecutive hour, and still the Drethan civilians had not turned it off. Archon Solver stood at the center of his command chamber, alone, because the last of his officers had walked out 11 minutes ago. His heat-sensing pits registered nothing useful. The walls were cold. The air was cold. The mathematics of his war had stopped making sense approximately 6 months ago, and the remainder had been a long exercise in discovering how wrong a correct equation could be. A communication channel opened. Not a demand. Not a weapon. A woman's face filled the screen. 51 years old, silver-streaked hair pulled back, and eyes that looked like they hadn't closed in days. She held something in her left hand. Piece of paper. Small. Torn at one corner. The crude bright colors of a child's drawing. Director Elena Vasquez looked at the Archon of the Drethan Imperium, and when she spoke, her voice was not loud. We did not choose this. The channel held. The fleet held. The planet beneath held its breath. And the feed froze. If you've ever watched a story unfold and felt the weight of it settle somewhere behind your ribs, the kind that doesn't leave, you already know why you should subscribe. Stay here. This one earns its silence. That same copper light, Ambassador Lisfarin had first noticed it 7 months earlier, standing in a reception hall on Arethian Station 9, where the color meant diplomacy was in session and nothing was expected to go wrong. Her glass had still been full, a Sethvery white, room temperature, barely touched. She had been reading a cultural brief on her datapad, Colony Meridian's annual arts festival. A minor item flagged because an Arethian trade envoy had been invited to attend. The brief included a photograph, a human pediatric clinic with drawings taped to the walls, a doctor crouching to examine a small Vrelian child's wing membrane while 2 human children waited on a bench behind him, kicking their legs. The caption read, Dr. Tomas Herrera, Colony Meridian Family Health Center, 3rd year of Integrated Species Pediatric Care. Farron had not lingered on it. She had swiped past. That was the kind of detail that would keep her awake later, the swiping past. The way something enormous could sit inside something small and ordinary, and you wouldn't know until afterward. Until it was too late to do anything but remember. Colony Meridian had been, by every metric Farron's office tracked, one of the quieter human achievements. 200 years had passed since humanity sealed its last weapon. 2 centuries. In that time, they had built Meridian from a mining outpost into a settlement of 2.1 million hospitals, schools, a university with a xenobiology department that 3 Arethian researchers had published through. The humans called themselves the Healers without irony, because that was what they had become. Their military infrastructure was not hidden. It was gone. Disassembled, archived, locked behind vault doors on 7 continents of a homeworld that had moved on. Farron had included this in her regional stability report. Human military capacity, negligible. Threat assessment, none. She had typed those words herself. She remembered the font. Through her diplomatic feeds, she had also noted, as a footnote, a minor political tremor, a disagreement inside the Drethan Imperium's military council. An intelligence summary crossed her desk 10 weeks before everything changed. A veteran general named Vreth Mahler had spoken against Archon Solver's expansion strategy in an open session. The transcript was partial, but the key exchange survived. Mahler had served alongside human peacekeeping units during the Selhari border stabilization 12 years prior. His assessment of humans was not theoretical. He had watched them build a field hospital in 9 hours on a world that was actively flooding, and then refused to evacuate it when the water rose another meter because there were still patients inside. I served with humans, Mahler had told the council. They don't break. Solver's response, according to the transcript, everyone breaks. Mahler had been demoted to supply logistics within the week. Farron had read this, flagged it as internal Drethan political friction, low relevance, filed it, moved on. She would think about that filing decision every single day for the rest of her career. The attack came without formal declaration. Drethan Imperium vessels, a full expeditionary flotilla, 64 ships, entered Colony Meridian's orbital space and commenced incendiary bombardment at 0347 local time. Farron learned of it the way diplomats learn of most catastrophes. A notification on a screen, phrased in language designed to soften the thing it described. Significant military action reported in Meridian sector. Casualty estimates pending. She was in her quarters when the real information arrived. Not the diplomatic summary. The broadcast. Someone on Meridian had opened an emergency relay channel, unencrypted wideband, aimed at anything that could receive it. The footage was raw, unedited. A handheld communicator, shaking with the hands that held it. Dr. Tomas Herrera, 34 years old, pediatrician, the same man from the cultural brief she had swiped past. His clinic was burning. The drawings on the walls, the ones in the photograph, the stick figures and bright suns and alien shapes colored in by 5-year-old hands, were curling black at the edges. He was moving through the hallway, and the communicator caught everything. The sound of structural beams failing, the heat distortion, a child's shoe on the floor, empty. Herrera was not screaming. That was the part that Farron would never be able to reconcile. How calm he was. Not peaceful. Not resigned. Calm the way someone becomes when the scale of what is happening exceeds the capacity for a normal response, and the body simply decides to keep functioning because someone has to bear witness. He grabbed something off the wall. A drawing. Stick figures, humans and aliens, holding hands beneath a yellow sun. A child had drawn it. He folded it once and pressed it against his chest with his free hand. 9 hours the footage ran. 9 hours of corridors collapsing, of evacuation shuttles that never arrived, of Dr. Herrera moving through the wreckage treating injuries he knew he couldn't survive long enough to follow up on. He set a broken arm. He carried a Vrelian child 4 blocks through rubble. He kept the communicator recording because he understood, with the clarity of a man who knows he is going to die, that the recording was the only thing that might outlast him. 1.7 million people lived on Colony Meridian. When the bombardment ended, the number was a historical footnote, a decimal point, a rounding error in Archon Solver's expansion calculus. Herrera's communicator was recovered from his hand. He had not let go. The footage cut out mid-sentence. His voice, exhausted, steady, speaking directly into the lens with the burning skyline behind him and the child's drawing still pressed against his coat. "They're killing the children. Please don't look away." The feed ended. Farron sat in her quarters on Arethian Station 9, the diplomatic brief still open on her datapad, the photograph of the clinic still cached in her files. She did not move for a very long time. The glass of Sethbury White sat untouched on the table beside her, and by the time she reached for it, it had gone warm. She did not drink it. She set it down again and stared at the dark screen where the footage had played and tried to understand what she had just watched, and what, if anything, her government was going to do about it. She already knew the answer. Nothing yet. Monitor the situation. The communication from Arethian Central Council arrived 14 minutes later, as if to confirm it. Formal position. Non-intervention. Observation status authorized. Humanitarian aid pending review. Pending review. 1.7 million dead, and the word was pending. Farron closed the brief. She pulled up her regional stability report, the one with the line about human military capacity being negligible, and stared at it until the words stopped meaning anything. Then she archived the whole file and sat in the copper-tinted light of her quarters while, for systems away, a planet burned and Earth said nothing. The silence from Earth lasted 96 hours. Farron tracked it the way her training had taught her to track diplomatic incidents, with timestamps, with status updates, with the careful notation of what was said and by whom. But there was nothing to notate. That was the part that unsettled her. In 43 years of diplomatic service, she had never encountered a species that responded to an act of war with 4 days of absolute nothing. No transmissions. No emergency broadcasts. No pleas for assistance to the Galactic Council. No threats, no condemnations, no demands for justice. Earth's communication relays remained active. The technical staff confirmed the channels were open, the infrastructure functional. Humanity had not lost the ability to speak. They had chosen not to. Farron filed hourly reports to Orethian Central Council, each one shorter than the last. Hour 24. No change. Earth silent. No military mobilization detected. Then, hour 48. No change. Then, hour 72. No change. By the third day, she stopped adding analysis. There was nothing to analyze. She was watching a wound form in real time and cataloging the absence of screaming. On Orethian Station 9, life continued. Trade ships docked and departed. Diplomats from 6 species passed through her corridor, and 3 of them stopped to express concern about the Meridian situation, which was the phrase everyone had settled on because it softened the shape of 1.7 million dead into something that fit inside a sentence. One Sethvari attaché asked Farron if she thought the humans would recover emotionally, as though the appropriate response to planetary massacre was therapy and a period of adjustment. She did not answer him. She thought about Dr. Herrera's hands, how steady they had been, how he had folded the drawing once, precisely, before pressing it to his chest. Not the gesture of a man in panic. The gesture of a man preserving evidence. Across the diplomatic feeds, Farron watched the Drethan Imperium celebrate. Archon Salver addressed his military council on day 2 of Earth's silence, and the intelligence intercept landed on Farron's desk 6 hours later. She read it in her office, standing, because she had stopped being able to sit comfortably with these transcripts. The human military capacity was dismantled 2 centuries ago, Salver had told his officers. Their weapons are sealed. Their fleet is non-existent. Their industrial base is oriented entirely toward medicine, agriculture, and construction. A species that chooses peace for 200 years has forgotten how to choose anything else. Beside him, Farron noted the positioning in the intelligence imagery. Stood strategist Cale Thorne, Salver's chief analyst. Thorne was younger than most Drethan senior staff, with the sharp angular skull plating typical of the southern continental bloodlines. The intelligence photo captured him in profile, and Farron noticed his scales. Dark green. In Drethan physiology, that coloration indicated confidence, a biological broadcast involuntary as readable as a human blush. Cale Thorne's body agreed with his Archon. The math was settled. Salver had ordered full occupation planning for Earth's remaining colonial territories. 17 worlds. The timetable was aggressive, 8 months for complete territorial absorption. The document used the word integration, which Farron recognized as the same diplomatic camouflage every conquering species employed. Different word. Same graves. She forwarded the intercept to Orethian Central Council with a single annotation. Drethan planning expanded military operations against human territories. Recommend reassessment of observation-only posture. The response came in 11 minutes. Position unchanged. Continue monitoring. Monitoring. As though she were tracking weather patterns. As though the appropriate diplomatic instrument for 1.7 million dead and an empire planning 17 more conquests was a careful taking of notes. Farron closed the message and stood at her office window, watching a cargo shuttle ease into its docking cradle. The station hummed its low electric hymn. Somewhere on Earth, 4 billion people had been silent for 3 days. And she was monitoring. If you're still here, listening, letting this silence sit the way Earth did, then you already understand why this story needs to be heard. Subscribe and stay through the silence. What comes after it changes everything. Then, on the 96th hour, someone spoke. The feed came through on every diplomatic channel simultaneously. Not a targeted transmission, not a private communique, but a wideband broadcast from Earth Parliament, the vast hemispherical chamber in Geneva where humanity's representatives gathered. Farron had visited it once, 8 years earlier, for a trade negotiation. She remembered the architecture. Tiered seating curved inward like cupped hands. The acoustic design so precise that a whisper at the central podium reached every seat without amplification. It had smelled like old wood and coffee, and the light had come through a glass ceiling that showed the sky. Now the chamber was full, every seat occupied. And the silence inside it was so complete that Farron could hear the ventilation system cycling through the broadcast audio. Speaker Yoon Sato stood at the central podium. Farron had met Sato once, briefly, a handshake at the same trade summit. A small woman, 61, with cropped gray hair and a stillness about her that suggested either extraordinary patience or extraordinary control. In the broadcast, she wore no ceremonial dress. A plain dark suit. No insignia. She held a single datapad. She did not greet the chamber. She did not open with preamble. She read Dr. Herrera's final words aloud. "They're killing the children. Please don't look away." The chamber did not react. No gasps. No murmurs. They had already spent 96 hours reacting in the only way that mattered, with the kind of silence that is not empty but full, pressurized, geological. The silence of tectonic plates deciding to move. Sato set the datapad down. She looked at the chamber, at the representatives of 4 billion people who had chosen peace for 200 years, who had dismantled their warships, decommissioned their weapons, sealed their arsenals behind vault doors and walked away because they believed the universe would let them be kind. "Open the vaults," she said. "All of them." For words. Farron played the clip back 3 times, certain she had missed something. A qualifier. Condition. A committee vote. A procedural motion. A timeline for discussion. There was nothing. For words, and the chamber rose. Not in applause. They simply stood up. Every one of them. And then the broadcast ended. Within the hour, Farron's intelligence feeds began to stutter with data she did not know how to categorize. Seismic readings from Earth. 7 continents. Coordinated subterranean activity at sites that had not appeared on any active use registry in 200 years. Massive doors, some of them 30 meters wide, according to the geological sensors. Grinding open for the first time since they had been sealed. The reports described dust. Literal, physical dust falling from weapons platforms, missile housings, ship chassis, and autonomous manufacturing systems that had been locked in climate-controlled darkness since before Farron was born. AI systems dormant for 2 centuries, reactivating. Not rebooting, reactivating. As though they had been waiting. As though someone 200 years ago had designed them to sleep, not die, and had trusted that the difference would matter someday. Within 72 hours, Earth's manufacturing base, the same infrastructure that had spent 2 centuries building hospitals and terraforming equipment and agricultural drones, pivoted. Farron watched the industrial output reports update in real time, and each refresh made less sense than the last. Shipyards that had been producing cargo haulers were now producing weapons platforms. Medical fabrication plants were machining hull plating. The same engineering brilliance that had made humanity the galaxy's most sophisticated healers was now pointed, with terrifying precision, in exactly the opposite direction. An Orethian engineering attaché on her staff, a young analyst named Drell, pulled up the output projections and stared at them for a full minute before speaking. "Ambassador, these numbers can't be right." They were right. The vaults had not just contained old weapons. They had contained the blueprints for new ones, designs that married 200 years of peaceful scientific advancement with the rediscovered physics of destruction. Humanity had not been idle during their centuries of peace. They had been learning, building, innovating, and somewhere in the back of their collective mind, in the sealed rooms and archived files and dormant AI cores, they had been keeping the option open. An engineer on Earth, the clip circulated on 12 separate intelligence feeds within a day, was recorded brushing 2 centuries of dust off a missile launcher in one of the continental vaults. She checked the maintenance tag hanging from the firing mechanism, squinted at the date stamp, and said, "Huh, still under warranty." Farron did not laugh. She was not sure anymore what the appropriate response was to any of this. 15 days ago, humanity had been the galaxy's pacifists, its teachers, its doctors, and now she was watching them build a war machine with the same calm, methodical competence they had once applied to building schools. She thought about General Vrethmaler, the demoted veteran, the voice no one had listened to. They don't break. He had been right, but he had also been incomplete. They didn't just not break. They transformed. Quietly. Completely. with a patience that looked like peace until you realized it was something else entirely. Something with teeth. She filed her report to Orethian Central Council. It was, for the first time in her career, a single sentence. Reassess immediately. The humans are not grieving. They are arming. The response took 4 hours, the longest delay she had ever experienced from Central Council. When it came, it was 2 words. Continue monitoring. Farron read it, closed the channel, and opened a personal log she had never used before. She wrote one line in it. We are going to regret this. Then she watched the shipyard numbers climb. 6 months. That was all it took. Farron had spent her career measuring civilizations in centuries. The slow accretion of treaties, the gradual calcification of trade routes, the generational drift of species from aggression to diplomacy or the reverse. 6 months was nothing. 6 months was a budget cycle, a diplomatic posting, the time it took to negotiate a minor tariff amendment. In 6 months, humanity built a fleet. 47 warships emerged from Earth's orbital shipyards, vessels unlike anything the galactic community had catalogued. Farron studied the intelligence imagery at her desk, rotating the holographic profiles, and found herself unable to reconcile what she was seeing with what she knew about human engineering. These were not the clumsy, retrofitted designs of a species scrambling to remember how war worked. The hulls were elegant. The weapon systems were integrated so seamlessly into the superstructure that the ships looked like they had been designed as a single organism, not assembled from components. 200 years of peaceful innovation, materials science, energy systems, computational architecture, medical-grade precision manufacturing, had been fed into the machinery of destruction, and the result was something that made Farron's throat tighten. They had not forgotten how to fight. They had learned how to build, and then they had applied that knowledge to the oldest equation their species knew. The Drethan had 300 warships in the Korath Belt, an asteroid field that served as the Imperium's forward staging area for the planned colonial occupations. 300 ships crewed by soldiers who had won every engagement in the belt for 40 years. Solver had positioned them there as a statement, a wall of force between Earth and the territories he intended to consume. The numbers were clear. 300 to 47. The mathematics, to a Drethan strategist, were not even interesting. Farron received the battle data in real time. She was in the operations monitoring suite on Orethian Station 9, a long, low-ceilinged room that smelled like ozone and warm circuitry, lined with tactical displays that the Orethian government maintained for exactly this kind of observation. 12 analysts sat at their stations. Ambassador Drell, whom she had promoted from attaché after his projection work proved uncomfortably accurate, stood beside her, his narrow Orethian fingers interlaced, his chromatophores cycling through the pale blue that indicated sustained anxiety. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light transit at the edge of the Korath Belt at 0914 Galactic Standard. 47 ships. The Drethan 300 were already in formation, a standard envelopment pattern, designed to surround and crush a numerically inferior force. It was textbook. It was the same tactic that had won Solver the Selhari campaign, the Vreth Corridor, the annexation of the Palori Reach. What happened next took 4 hours. The human ships did not behave like a fleet. They behaved like a single mind. Their coordination was so precise that Farron's analysts initially assumed they were operating under centralized AI control, but the communication intercepts showed human voices. Pilots, commanders, engineers, making decisions in fractions of seconds, adjusting trajectories and weapons patterns with a fluidity that the Drethan formation could not match. The peaceful engineering showed a medical-grade targeting system designed originally for microsurgical drones had been scaled up to weapons platforms. It could identify and strike structural weaknesses in Drethan hull plating with a precision that turned every shot into a critical hit. Energy systems designed for hospital-grade reliability meant the human ships could sustain continuous fire without the cycling downtime that plagued Drethan weapons. Even the hull material was repurposed, an agricultural shielding compound, meant to protect terraforming equipment from radiation, turned out to absorb energy weapon impacts with extraordinary efficiency. 217 Drethan ships were destroyed in 4 hours. The operations suite was silent. 12 analysts staring at displays that were updating faster than comprehension allowed. Drell's chromatophores had gone white, a color Farron had never seen on him before, and one she later learned indicated a biological fear response so deep it overrode conscious emotional regulation. "Ambassador," he said, and his voice was barely functional. "The remaining 83 Drethan vessels are retreating. The humans are not pursuing. Not pursuing." 47 ships had just dismantled a force nearly 7 times their size, and they were not pursuing. They held position in the Korath Belt, engines idling, weapons cooling, and waited. That restraint, that calculated, deliberate restraint, frightened Farron more than the battle itself. She pulled up the latest intelligence intercept from the Drethan command structure. It was Cale Thorne's updated strategic analysis, transmitted to Solver within an hour of the Korath Belt engagement. Farron read it twice. Human industrial output has increased 4,000% in 6 months. They are producing 30 warships per week. At current acceleration, they will outnumber our entire fleet in 4 months. And there, captured in the visual feed attached to the report, was Cale Thorne himself, standing at his analysis station on the Drethan flagship. His scales were pale yellow, not the dark green of confidence, not the neutral olive of composure. Pale yellow, the color the Drethan body produces when it knows, at a level deeper than thought, that something has gone catastrophically wrong. Farron saved the image. She did not know why. Later, she would understand that she was collecting evidence. Not for a trial, not for a report, but for the history she could already feel writing itself around her. General Vreth Mahler had been re-promoted. The intelligence feeds confirmed it. Panicking officers in the Drethan chain of command had pulled him out of supply logistics and restored his rank within hours of the Korath Belt result. The transcript of his first address to the reconstituted military council reached Farron's desk that evening. "I told you," Mahler had said, "they fight harder when they're losing. Imagine what they do when they're winning." Solver had refused the ceasefire Mahler demanded. The Archon's response was not recorded, but the outcome was Mahler confined to advisory capacity. Solver retained command. And somewhere in the silence between those two decisions, the fracture inside the Drethan Imperium became permanent. Officers began to defect. Not publicly, not yet, but the intelligence intercepts showed communications between mid-ranking Drethan commanders and neutral diplomatic channels, asking quiet questions about asylum procedures. Cale Thorne, the analyst, the one whose scales had turned yellow, had been seen in private conversation with Mahler 3 times in 2 days. No transcript, no intercept, but Farron understood the body language of political collapse. She had watched it before in slower species. She had never watched it happen this fast. Solver ordered a final gambit, scorched earth destruction of human agricultural worlds, an attempt to starve what he could not defeat. The order went out to his remaining fleet commanders. His fleet refused. Not all of them, not a formal mutiny, but enough. Enough captains who had watched 217 ships burn in 4 hours. Enough officers who had read Thorne's projections and understood the curve. Enough soldiers who had heard Mahler's voice, the veteran, the one who had served with humans, the one who had been right, and decided they would rather face a court-martial than face what was coming. The human fleet moved. 312 warships, the 47 from Korath plus 265 produced in the months since, crossed into Drethan sovereign space and took up orbital position around the Drethan homeworld. Farron watched the fleet deployment on the tactical display in the operations suite, and the formation was so precise, so geometrically deliberate, that it looked less like a military operation and less like a siege and more like a statement. A closed hand held open. They did not fire. They broadcast. Dr. Herrera's footage. 9 hours. Every channel. Every frequency. Every personal communicator on the Drethan homeworld. A dead pediatrician bearing witness to what the Drethan Imperium had done to 1.7 million people, playing on loop in the living rooms and command centers and public squares of the species responsible. And then, after the footage, something else. New footage. Human rescue workers in the field hospitals behind the Korath Belt engagement treating Drethan prisoners. Setting broken bones. Administering pain relief. Offering water. The same careful, competent, unhurried medical attention that Dr. Herrera had given to Vrelian children in his clinic on a world that no longer existed. The humans were healing the soldiers who had fought for the empire that killed their families. Drell stood beside Farron and watched the broadcast metrics. The Drethan civilian population is not turning it off, he said, his voice thin. Viewership is increasing. There are protests in the capital. Farron nodded. She did not speak. She was watching the display, but she was thinking about Director Elena Vasquez, the woman she had read about in the intelligence briefs but never met. 51 years old. Former school principal. Grandmother. Her granddaughter had lived on Colony Meridian. Had been one of the 1.7 million. Vasquez had held the child's drawing during the 96 hours of silence. She had carried it through 6 months of war. And now she was here at the head of a fleet that could reduce the Drethan homeworld to slag, and instead of firing, she was showing them a dead man's home movies. That was the thing Farron could not stop turning over. The restraint, the precision. Not just in the weapons or the tactics, but in the moral architecture of what humanity was doing. They had rebuilt themselves into a force capable of annihilation, and they were using that force to make a point. To say, look at what you did. And look at what we are choosing not to do. The communication channel opened. Solver. Alone in his command chamber, his officers gone, his fleet fractured, his empire unraveling. Faced the screen. And there she was. Vasquez. Silver-streaked hair. Eyes that had not closed. The drawing in her left hand. A child's stick figures, humans and aliens holding hands beneath a yellow sun. She looked at him. We did not choose this war. Her voice carried no rage, no triumph, something worse than either, a clarity that had been purchased at a price Farron could see written in the lines around her eyes. But we will choose how it ends. With mercy they did not show us. The surrender was signed within the hour. Vasquez's terms were precise. Disarmament, war crimes tribunal, guaranteed civilian protection protocols for every species in former Drethan territory. And one additional condition. The one that made Farron set down her datapad and press her hands flat against her desk because she needed to feel something solid. The Drethan would fund and build the Colony Meridian Memorial. Solver personally. The Archon who had ordered the bombardment would oversee the construction of the monument to what he had destroyed. Farron filed her final operational report that evening. Her hands were steady. Her language was measured. But when she reached the summary line, the place where 43 years of diplomatic training told her to write something balanced, something that acknowledged complexity and cautioned against premature conclusions, she stopped. She deleted the summary. She wrote instead, I watched a species choose peace for 200 years. I watched them lose everything that peace was supposed to protect. And I watched them win a war in 6 months without becoming the thing that attacked them. I do not know what to call that. But I know we should have helped, and we did not, and that will be the first line of this chapter when the histories are written. She sent it. She did not wait for a response. In the tribunal chamber, a vast, curved hall on neutral ground, packed with representatives of 300 species. Dr. Herrera's footage played in full. 9 hours. Unedited. Every delegate watched. Nobody left. Solver sat in the accused platform, his heat-sensing pits registering the body warmth of 300 species pressing in around him, and for the first time in the intelligence record, his biological readings showed something other than analytical calm. He was convicted, and his sentence was not a cell. It was a construction site. 5 years later, Ambassador Liz Farron returned to Colony Meridian. She had requested the posting herself, a formal diplomatic visit to attend the memorial dedication, though the word formal felt wrong in her mouth when she said it. There was nothing formal about what had brought her here. She had carried the weight of continue monitoring for 5 years. She had written those words into the historical record during the tribunal testimony, had watched them projected on a screen in front of 300 species, had sat with her hands folded while the translation systems rendered her failure into every language the galaxy spoke. She was not here as an ambassador. She was here because she owed a debt she could not name to people who had never asked her to pay it. The colony had been rebuilt. Not restored, rebuilt. The distinction mattered. The streets did not follow the old grid. The buildings were new materials, new architecture, designed by human and alien engineers working from shared blueprints. Drethan construction crews had laid the foundations. That had been part of the sentence. Solver himself had been present for the first 11 months, directing labor details under armed escort. His heat-sensing pits registering the warmth of the soil where 1.7 million people had lived and died. Farron did not know what he had felt during those months. She did not think he knew either. The memorial stood where Dr. Herrera's clinic had been. It was not large. Farron had expected something monumental, a tower, a wall, a sculpture scaled to the magnitude of what had happened here. Instead, it was a garden. Low walls of pale stone. Trees, young ones, their canopies still thin enough to let the sunlight pass through in shifting patterns on the ground. Benches. A path that wound inward toward a small central structure no taller than Farron's shoulder. And inside the structure, under glass, preserved in climate-controlled stillness, a child's drawing. Stick figures, humans and aliens, holding hands beneath a yellow sun. The paper was stained. One corner was torn. The edges were darkened where heat had curled them before someone's hands had folded the page and pressed it against his chest and held it there until there was nothing left of him to hold anything. Below the glass, an inscription cut into the stone. They drew us holding hands. We will build the world they imagined. Farron read it 3 times. Her vision blurred on the second reading, and she did not wipe her eyes, because there was no one here she needed to perform composure for. She stood in the garden that had been a clinic, that had been a place where a man treated children of every species with the same steady hands, and she let the tears come because they had been waiting for 5 years and she was tired of monitoring. Director Vasquez found her there. Not by accident, Farron understood that later. Vasquez had known she was coming. Had probably arranged the timing so they would meet here in this specific place beside this specific piece of glass. Vasquez looked older, 56 now. The silver in her hair had overtaken the dark. She stood beside Farron and looked at the drawing, and her expression was not grief and not peace but something between them. A settlement reached after long negotiation with a loss that would never fully resolve. "We should have helped," Farron said. Her voice cracked on helped, and she did not try to repair it. The council voted to observe. I filed the reports. I watched, and I did nothing, and You're here now, Vasquez said. That is not enough. Vasquez looked at her. And something in that look, steady, tired, undeceived, told Farron that the director knew exactly how insufficient it was. That she was not offering absolution. She was offering something smaller and harder. A way forward. "You can help now," Vasquez said. Farron nodded. She did not trust her voice. She turned back to the glass, to the stick figures with their joined hands, to the yellow sun that a child had drawn in a world where humans and aliens sat together in a waiting room and kicked their legs on a bench and thought nothing of it. A world that had been burned and built again, and was still, somehow, impossibly stubbornly, trying to become the thing a 5-year-old had imagined it could be. Behind her, the sound of the garden reached her in pieces. Footsteps on the stone path. A voice, high, young, speaking a language Farron did not recognize. Then laughter. Then another voice answering. This one deeper, with the harmonic undertone of a Vrelian adolescent. She turned. Children were playing in the garden. Human children and alien children, chasing each other between the young trees, their shadows stretching long in the afternoon light. One of them, a small girl with dark hair, had stopped to help a Vrelian boy whose wing membrane had caught on a low branch, and she was untangling it with the careful, patient focus of someone who had been taught that this was simply what you did. The sunlight came through the thin canopy and fell across them in shifting gold, and for a moment the image was so close to the drawing under the glass that Farron's breath stopped. Stick figures, holding hands, a yellow sun. The children ran on, and the light moved with them, and the garden held its warmth long after they had gone. This story started with a drawing and ended with the world it imagined. The question I keep turning over is this: do you think mercy given to those who showed none makes humanity stronger? Or does it leave the door open for the next solver? Subscribe and come back tomorrow. The next story is already waiting, and it starts where mercy runs out.